Okay, welcome to our next tutorial on Xcode, Swift and Playgrounds. In this particular tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to be covering the three basic control structures of programming, and we'll also have a look at some code associated with those three basic control structures. And in addition to that, we'll look at some definitions of variables and constants, because people always ask, what is a variable, what is a constant, and of course it's very important to know that. So what we'll do is we'll start off with a new Xcode playground, and we'll call this one the three basic control structures. We'll leave the platform as iOS, and we'll hit next, and we'll save it in our practice, or you can save it in your tutorials folder. We'll just make the playgrounds the right size here so we can see what's going on. Okay, now what is a variable? Well, basically it's a value that we assign to a word or a symbol. Okay, for example, we might say that a letter is equal to a particular number. And then we go about using that value to perform calculations. All right, now a couple of things you need to know is that with Swift Playground, you can't actually get the user to input values into Playgrounds to then perform calculations like you can in Swift proper when you're using the main interface. So that's just something you'll have to be aware of, and no doubt Apple will probably look at changing that in the future with upgrades. Okay, but at the moment, no, you can't ask a user to input a value to a variable and then use that variable to complete a calculation. So just be aware of that for now. So what we can do is, with this particular task or exercise that we're going to do in a moment, is we're going to actually create a number of variables. We'll assign numbers to those variables, and then we'll perform some calculations. Okay, so that's what a variable is. Now we also have what's called a constant. Okay, and with constants, they are basically they're values that are assigned to declarations that don't change. Okay, so a pretty good example of that is pi. So let's just bring that up here on the screen. So for example, we've got pi is equal to 3.14159 and so on. So what we can do is we can declare pi as a number that doesn't change, and that's what a constant is. So we say let pi equal 3.14159. Now you'll notice with these variables and declarations that there is a semicolon at the end of the declaration. Okay, so always have a semicolon at the end of your variable or constants declaration. Okay, just another thing I need to speak to you about is you might have noticed these green comments on the screen. Now, in programming, it's really good practice to, when you're writing code, to actually put in explanations for the code that you've written. Because if someone else comes across your code, they may not understand what you've written. But if you've got an English or any other language explanation for what's going on with your code that you've obviously designed and implemented, then it's a lot easier for somebody to debug what the problem might be. So these comments, we can write blocks of comments. Okay, we can write blocks of comments here using the / and the asterisk, and then closing the blocks of comments with an asterisk and a /, or we can have single line comments with a 2 /. Okay, so that works. That works for all of them. Okay. All right. Now the next part I want to introduce to you is the 3 basic control structures. Okay, and the 3 control structures in programming, we've got sequence, selection, and iteration or repetition. Okay, now for this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it very simple. I'm only going to go into the basics for each control structure. So we'll get into more detail with selection and iteration down the track, but for now I'll just introduce the basics to you to get you underway. So let's look at sequence to start with. Now, what we've got here is a number of sequential steps to drive a car. So we've got the first step here, which is to open the car door. Next step, enter the driver's seat. Third step, fasten seatbelt. Fourth step, adjust mirrors. Fifth step, place key in ignition. 6, turn ignition. 7, engage gear. 8, use indicator. 9, check mirrors. And 10, drive. So that's a very simple sequence of events that we can write up as a program, as an algorithm to then implement as code. All right. So what we're going to do in order to implement this as code is we're going to write up a number of variables. Okay. Actually, we'll call them constants because we won't change. We won't change them. We will change them later on, but to start with, we'll assign a specific number to each of the steps. Okay, so let's do that now. So as you can see, each of our steps here has been assigned a value of 1. Okay, and that comes up over here as well, so you can see 1 for each of the steps. Now, all we're going to do in this particular exercise is we're going to add the steps total, and we're going to assign the value of those total steps to a constant called drive correctly. So let's bring that up on the screen now. Okay, so all we've done here is we've added the steps, or the value assigned to each of the steps. We've added it together and we've assigned the sum of those steps to the constant called drive correctly. And you can see the drive correctly constant is equal to the value of 10. We can also print the value of drive correctly, and there's a certain syntax that needs to be followed in order to do that, and I'll just put that up here on the screen as well so you can see what it looks like. But take careful note of the brackets, the quotation marks, the backward slash, and the brackets, and the actual constant that's declared within the brackets. Okay, and again, as you can see here, we've got the value of 10 coming up on the screen. Okay, so that's all sequence is. Just a number of steps that you need to follow one after the other until you've finished with whatever it is you need to do. Now, in the follow-up tutorial where you'll be required to write your own code, the exercise that you'll need to complete involves making cheese on toast. Okay, and you'll need to follow something similar to what I've done here in order to write your code up, follow the sequence, get the sequence right, and create some variables and constants in order to total up the steps that you follow for your sequence. Now with selection, basically selection is an answer that is binary. However, there can also be more than two possible answers depending on what selection statements we use. Okay, so the basic selection statements that we can use is the if-else statement. So if a value is greater than the number 10, print a statement saying the number is greater than 10. Or alternatively, if a value is equal to 3, print that the value is less than 10. Okay, and then there's all sorts of other potential outcomes with 3 or more outcomes. For example, with traffic lights, you can have case statements, you can have nested if statements for a range of different options. So there's all sorts of possibilities with selection, but the most basic outcomes using an if-else statement once is obviously a binary outcome. So what we're going to do now is, using our drive correctly exercise, is we're going to make a simple if-else statement. All right, so let me just bring that up here on the screen. So we've got here, if drive correctly is less than 10, then print back to driving school. Else, print well done, you are driving properly and safely. So if you remember back here, of course, our drive correctly constant was equal to 10. So we've taken that value, we've compared it to see if it is equal to 10, which it is. And of course, because here we've got a number that's less than 10, if it was less than 10, the statement that would be printed would be back to driving school. Okay, so well done, you're driving properly and safely is what comes up now. So take note of the structure of the if-else statement. That's really important. Okay, so what we've got here, we've got if. Okay, we've got the constant or variable declared here, and that's followed by the condition, which is here. Okay, so our condition is that if drive correctly is less than 10, the statement that will print on the screen is back to driving school. However, if the statement is not true, okay, then the statement that's printed is the alternative, which is well done, you are driving properly and safely. Take note of the bracketing. We've got braces for each of the possible statements. Okay, so remember we've got a binary outcome. Okay, it's if or else, and for each of the outcomes, okay, we have braces for each one. So we've got opening braces here, closing braces here, opening braces here, closing braces here. Very important to get that right, because otherwise you'll end up with coding errors on your screen. Now the third and last control structure we're looking at is called iteration or repetition. So what iteration and repetition is an answer that loops or repeats until a condition is satisfied. Now, to give you a good example of this using drive correctly, what we're going to do is use a simple while statement. So with the while statement, okay, we're going to have to do a couple of things to make sure that it works. And what we're going to have to do is actually use a counter to help us in achieving what we want to do here with this particular part of the exercise. So what we've done is we've declared a variable called counter, and we've made it equal to drive correctly. Now if you remember, we had drive correctly equaled the number 10. All right, so we're saying that, well, counter is also going to equal whatever drive correctly equals, which is the number 10 at the moment. All right, so we've declared that. All right, we've used our semicolon at the end of the line there, and then we've started our loop, our repetition statement, which is while. Okay, and that's probably one of the most common repetition statements used. There are a number of other repetition statements in programming as well. There's for loops. There's a number of other ones that we will introduce to you later on. But for now, just concentrate on the while loop. Okay, so we've got while the counter is less than 10. Okay. Add 1 to the counter and print, keep learning, you are getting there, practice makes perfect. All right. Now you can see over here that we have the variable counter and drive correctly equals 10. Now in order to get this to work, okay, I'm going to change some values at the top here. I'm going to change that to 0. And I'm also going to change that to 0 as well. So step 9 and step 10 will be changed to 0. And you can see that because our counter now equals 8 and not 10, the statement, keep learning, you are getting there, practice makes perfect, is repeated twice. Okay, so if we change this one, step 9, back to 1, you'll see that the statement, because counter is equal to 9, the statement only appears once. Okay, so the statement appears, the counter is incremented by 1, which is what this plus plus sign means. Okay, so it means you're adding 1 to the counter. All right, the statement is printed, and then you go back to the start of the while loop. The statement is checked, okay, to see if it's true. And once the condition is satisfied, then the counter stops repeating. Okay, so that's how while loops in their simplest form operate. Right, they're not too hard to implement, but you do need to make sure that you include the braces in the correct places. Okay, the counter needs to be declared as a variable if you're going to use a counter in the loop. And of course, when you're printing statements, make sure you put in your brackets and make sure you put in your quotation marks as well. And at the end, make sure you close the statement with a closing brace. Okay, now hopefully you've understood a bit about that, about the 3 basic control structures. What is a variable, what is a constant, and what I would like you to do to reinforce what I've shown you here is I would like you to complete the same format on your own screen, but using the cheese on toast exercise covered in our worksheet. And that'll be worksheet 1A. Okay, so let me just bring that up here on the screen. Okay, so have a bit of fun with it. See if you can basically implement sequence for cheese on toast. Maybe come up with a number of steps of your own. Look at assigning a value to constants for your steps. Maybe come up with a sum. It might even be a product. It might even be difference. Who knows? It's up to you to come up with your own design. And then look at implementing the cheese on toast exercise as a selection statement, using a selection statement, and then again using a simple while loop, okay, to complete the exercise. And that'll give you a bit of a grounding on the 3 control structures, and something that'll come in very handy not only in the Swift exercises that you'll be doing that'll be coming up, but also in programming down the track if you choose to do it in the future, possibly even as a career. Okay, I hope that helped, and we'll move on to our next tutorial.